An airport, alive with the usual thrum of travel, became the unlikely stage for an unthinkable drama. Colonel Marcus Thorne, a man whose uniform whispered tales of valor, undertook his most sacred duty, escorting a fallen young soldier, Specialist Ethan Vance, 19 years young, home. But when an airline agent uttered the chilling words, "You can't board," citing policy, a quiet act of defiance against this sacrilege ignited a firestorm. Watched by a nation through the unwavering lenses of countless smartphones, this single moment of profound disrespect cascaded into a viral outrage, a raw testament to public power when confronted with injustice. What unfolded next was not just about a denied flight. It was a battle for honor, a reckoning that would shake a corporation to its foundations and reaffirm an unbreakable promise. This is that story. The cavernous expanse of Northgate International Airport thrummed with a familiar discordant symphony. Wheels of 1,000 rolling suitcases rumbled like distant thunder across the polished terrazzo floors. Announcements echoed, disembodied voices calling out destinations that seemed worlds away. Families, a chaotic ballet of flailing limbs and brightly colored luggage, navigated the throngs. Business travelers, their faces illuminated by the cool glow of their smartphones, moved with a focused, almost predatory intensity. Children, tiny dynamos fueled by sugar and excitement, darted ahead of parents whose weary smiles barely concealed their exhaustion. It was the orchestrated chaos of modern travel, a river of humanity flowing towards unseen horizons. Into this vibrant maelstrom stepped Colonel Marcus Thorne. At 52, his presence was an island of stoic calm. His dress blues, immaculate and adorned with the quiet testament of a distinguished career, seemed to absorb the frantic energy around him. Each click of his mirror-shined Corcoran boots against the tiles was a measured, deliberate counterpoint to the surrounding haste. He'd navigated this ritual countless times, airports blurring into a monotonous backdrop for deployments, assignments, and returns. But today was profoundly different. The ache in his chest, a familiar companion after decades of service, was not solely from the reassuring weight of the ribbons and medals arrayed like a second skin. It was a deeper, more resonant sorrow, emanating from the precious, somber cargo awaiting him on the tarmac. A flag-draped casket bearing the earthly remains of Specialist Ethan Vance, 19 years old. A life extinguished far too soon, a vibrant flame snuffed out on a dusty foreign field. Colonel Thorne drew a slow, steadying breath, the scent of jet fuel and stale coffee a familiar tang in the air. He adjusted the brim of his service cap, the gesture precise, almost reverent. He had a sacred duty to perform, a solemn promise to uphold, one that transcended rank, accolades, or personal comfort. This wasn't about Colonel Marcus Thorne. It was about the unwavering commitment made to every man and woman who donned the uniform, who ventured into harm's way, and who, like young Specialist Vance, would not make the journey home under their own power. No one gets left behind. The words were an unspoken creed, etched into the very fiber of his being. He approached the Odyssey Airlines priority check-in counter, his movements economical, his bearing erect. He placed his official military orders and identification card on the cool laminate. The agent, a woman named Ms. Albright, perhaps in her late 30s, with meticulously applied makeup that couldn't quite mask the fatigue in her eyes, offered a cursory glance. Her fingers, tipped with perfectly manicured nails, danced across her keyboard with practiced efficiency, a frown line deepening between her brows. Then she looked up. Her gaze met his, and for a fraction of a second, something flickered in her eyes, a hesitation, a subtle recalibration. It was a pause just a beat too long, a momentary snag in the otherwise smooth fabric of her professional demeanor. "Sir, may I see that again, please?" Her voice, when it came, was unexpectedly tight, a thin wire of tension. Colonel Thorne extended the documents once more, his eyes a startlingly clear blue, observing her with unnerving stillness. He noted the almost imperceptible tremor in her hand as she took them, the quick, furtive glance she cast towards a colleague further down the counter, the slight stiffening of her shoulders as if bracing for an impact she hadn't anticipated. She turned, her voice a low, urgent whisper as she conferred with the other agent. He, a younger man with a neatly trimmed beard, glanced over, his expression a careful, unreadable mask. The moment stretched, taut and heavy, pregnant, with an unease Thorne had encountered before, in far different arenas, but one he never quite grew accustomed to. When Ms. Albright turned back, her smile was a brittle, forced contrivance, stretched too thin across her lips. I'm terribly sorry, Colonel," she began, the honorific sounding hollow. "But there appears to be an issue with your ticket. We won't be able to allow you to board at this time." Colonel Thorne exhaled, a slow, deliberate release of air. He had faced down enemy fire in contested war zones, navigated the treacherous currents of international diplomacy, and untangled Gordian knots of political intrigue. He had stared into the abyss and not flinched. But this bureaucratic impasse, here, on American soil, while on a mission of such profound solemnity, felt alien, almost surreal. "I am escorting the remains of a fallen soldier," he stated, his voice a low, even baritone, devoid of inflection. He tapped a finger once on the crisp paperwork. "Everything is in order. The Department of Defense has made all necessary arrangements." Ms. Albright studiously avoided his gaze, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere over his left shoulder. "I understand that, sir. Truly I do. But there's a new security protocol in place, and unfortunately we cannot override it." Colonel Thorne maintained his unwavering calm, his voice steady as granite. "A security protocol?" "Yes, sir," she affirmed, her voice faltering slightly. She attempted another weak, unconvincing smile. It's just policy, you see." He didn't move. He didn't blink. His posture remained ramrod straight, a silent testament to years of discipline. "Policy," he repeated, the single word hanging in the air, heavy with unspoken questions. "What policy, Ms. Albright?" Behind him, the queue was lengthening, a restless murmur rippling through the waiting passengers. He could feel their eyes on him, a prickling awareness on the back of his neck. But instead of yielding, instead of stepping aside, he squared his already broad shoulders, his feet planted as if rooted to the spot. He wasn't leaving without a substantive answer. It was clear, however, that the airline staff were equally determined not to yield. The air around the counter grew thick, charged with an unspoken confrontation. The ambient hum of the terminal seemed to recede, conversations in the line behind him tapering off as more people began to register the unfolding drama. A decorated Army colonel in full-dress uniform being denied passage. It wasn't a scene one encountered every day. Colonel Thorne, his composure an unbreachable fortress, pressed on, his voice retaining its measured, almost preternaturally calm tone. "Ma'am, I require a clear understanding of precisely what this issue entails. This is a military assignment, a sacred duty, not a personal excursion. My documentation is validated at the highest levels." Ms. Albright hesitated again, her eyes darting towards a huddle of Odyssey Airline staff now congregated near a back office, their whispered conference just out of earshot. Finally, a supervisor, a man named Henderson in his mid-50s with a weary, put-upon expression and a slightly rumpled suit, detached himself from the group and approached. He meticulously adjusted his name tag. "Mark Henderson, Customer Service Supervisor." then folded his arms, his gaze sweeping over Colonel Thorne with a practiced air of authority. "Colonel, I sincerely apologize for this inconvenience," Henderson began, his voice laced with that smooth, professional veneer people often adopted when they wish to curtail further inquiry. "However, as Ms. Albright indicated, we have certain stringent policies in place, and regrettably, we are not at liberty to override them at this particular juncture." That phrase again. Policies, not at liberty. Euphemisms for obstruction. Colonel Thorne inhaled slowly, deeply through his nostrils, the air tasting suddenly acrid. He'd encountered this kind of bureaucratic opacity before, cloaked in different jargon, in different settings, but the intent was always the same: deflection and delay. "Mr. Henderson," he said, his voice still quiet but carrying an undeniable weight, "I have flown with military escorts on numerous occasions. I am intimately familiar with the established procedures. I am also aware that there is no existing policy that would legitimately prevent me from boarding this aircraft with my charge. So let us dispense with the pleasantries and be forthright. What is the actual reason I am being denied passage?" Henderson cleared his throat, shifting his weight uneasily from one foot to the other. It's simply an additional security measure, Colonel. Nothing personal, I assure you. Nothing personal." The words were a bitter irony. Colonel Thorne felt a muscle tighten along his jawline, but he ruthlessly suppressed the surge of anger. He had been in too many high-stakes negotiations, too many rooms where individuals hid behind vague pronouncements and obfuscation. They were testing his resolve, perhaps hoping he would lose his temper, create a scene, give them a pretext to summon airport security and remove him. He would not grant them that satisfaction. The passengers in the queue were no longer just idly waiting. They were watching, rapt. A woman in a crimson blazer whispered urgently to her husband. A young man clutching his boarding pass, probably no older than Specialist Vance had been, frowned, his gaze shifting between the colonel and the airline employees, a look of dawning bewilderment on his face. Then, a new voice, gravelly and resonant, cut through the charged silence. "Sir, if I may? Is there an issue with this officer's military clearance?" Colonel Thorne turned his head slightly. The speaker was a man several places back in line, older, perhaps in his late 60s, with a face weathered by time and sun, and a faded U.S. Marine Corps utility cover pulled low over his brow. A leatherneck, a veteran. The air crackled with a new intensity. Supervisor Henderson looked visibly discomfited. "No, sir, that's not the issue. This isn't about clearance. We are simply adhering to standard protocol." The Marine let out a short, sharp exhalation, a sound halfway between a snort and a sigh of profound exasperation. "Yeah, well, I've been through airport security more times than I've had hot meals, and I've never seen any standard protocol stop a soldier from escorting one of our own home." He folded his arms, his stance mirroring the colonel's. "So, what is it, really?" A fresh wave of murmurs rippled through the line. The distinct glow of smartphone screens began to illuminate faces as people, sensing a story, started recording. The shift in the atmosphere was palpable, a tangible current of unease and dawning indignation. The airline staff behind the counter could feel it too. Ms. Albright, who had initiated the denial, stole a nervous glance at Henderson, her earlier composure visibly crumbling. Henderson sighed, a deep, weary sound, and rubbed a hand over his temple as if trying to ward off a migraine. He looked at Colonel Thorne again, the weight of the rapidly escalating situation clearly settling upon him. "Allow me to double-check something," he muttered, his voice lacking its earlier conviction, before turning and retreating towards the back office, disappearing from view. Ms. Albright, left alone at the front line, kept her gaze resolutely fixed on her computer screen, feigning an intense interest in its contents. Colonel Thorne did not move. He stood, a pillar of quiet defiance, shoulders squared, gaze fixed straight ahead. He wasn't going anywhere. And it was becoming increasingly clear, neither was this story. The murmur in the terminal was no longer mere background noise. It was focused, charged, a collective hum of burgeoning outrage. The people in line were no longer just anonymous travelers. They were witnesses, chroniclers. The Marine who had spoken up was not alone in his indignation. A middle-aged woman in a denim jacket, clutching her purse to her chest as if it were a shield, shook her head and leaned towards her husband. "This just isn't right," she muttered, her voice tight with disapproval. "He's in uniform, with a fallen hero." A younger man, barely out of his teens, wearing a hoodie and oversized headphones, had his phone out, his thumbs flying across the screen with practiced speed. People were taking notice, and that, Colonel Thorne knew, was a dangerous proposition for any corporation, especially an airline reliant on public goodwill. He kept his expression impassive, a mask honed by years of command. But inwardly, he was cataloging every detail. The shifting allegiances in the crowd, the nervous tics of the airline staff, the subtle but undeniable tide turning against Odyssey Airlines. Henderson had not yet returned, which meant one of two things. He was either scrambling to concoct a more plausible excuse, or he was hoping the situation would diffuse, that Thorne would simply give up and melt away. Neither was a likely outcome. Then, a clear, slightly hesitant voice came from just behind him. "Excuse me, Colonel." Thorne turned his head fractionally. A young woman, no older than 25, with earnest eyes and a determined set to her jaw, stood a few feet away. Her smartphone held aloft, its camera lens pointed towards the unfolding scene. I hope you don't mind my intrusion, sir," she said, her voice gaining strength. "But I just want to be absolutely certain I understand this correctly. They are actually refusing to let you board your flight?" Her voice wasn't loud, but her careful, deliberate enunciation carried, drawing even more attention from those nearby. Colonel Thorne allowed himself a fractional exhale, his gaze briefly flicking towards Ms. Albright, who now looked as if she wished the floor would swallow her whole. "That is correct, young lady." The young woman, whose name tag identified her as Maya, blinked, as if she had hoped for, expected, a different answer. She hesitated for only a heartbeat, then gave a single, decisive nod. She turned her phone screen towards him, the red live icon glowing prominently. "I'm live streaming this right now, Colonel," she said, her voice firm. "People need to see what's happening. This is unacceptable." And just like that, the floodgates creaked open. Another man further back raised his own phone. "This is an absolute disgrace," he declared, his voice ringing with anger. "This man is a decorated officer, literally escorting a fallen soldier home to his family. What kind of country are we becoming?" A woman towards the rear of the burgeoning crowd, her voice sharp, waved her hand towards the counter. "Hey, Odyssey Airlines, can someone over there please explain to all of us why this colonel is being denied his flight? We deserve an answer." A few people shifted uncomfortably, clearly torn between the desire not to get involved and a growing sense of civic duty. But the energy in the room had irrevocably changed. What had begun as hushed whispers and sidelong glances had swelled into a chorus of open discontent, a wave of public opinion that the airline staff could no longer hope to ignore or deflect. Ms. Albright, still trapped behind the counter, looked genuinely terrified. Her hands were frozen over her keyboard, her eyes darting wildly between the increasing number of camera lenses now pointed in her direction. Then, the Marine veteran, Sergeant Major Kowalski, as Thorne now mentally dubbed him, took a deliberate step forward, planting himself beside the colonel. He was clearly done with polite inquiries. "I've seen a lot of things in my 70-odd years," he said, his voice steady, resonant, and carrying the unmistakable ring of authority that came from decades of leading men. "I've seen bravery, I've seen sacrifice, I've seen loyalty, but I never, ever thought I'd live to see the day when an American soldier, a colonel no less, especially one on a sacred mission escorting the remains of a brother in arms, would be treated with such blatant disrespect by an American company on American soil." The terminal, moments before a cacophony of sound, had fallen into an almost eerie quiet. Even the usually incessant airport announcements over the public address system seemed to have been muted, distant echoes. The only distinct sounds were the intermittent beeps and clicks from smartphones, capturing every second of the escalating confrontation. Sergeant Major Kowalski squared his shoulders, his gaze sweeping over the Odyssey Airlines counter like a general reviewing a poorly disciplined unit. "This," he declared, his voice ringing with cold fury, "is an unmitigated disgrace." Ms. Albright swallowed hard, a visible tremor running through her. Her fingers, when she tried to click at her keyboard again, trembled uncontrollably. Supervisor Henderson was still conspicuously absent. Passengers whispered amongst themselves a low, angry hum. A baby, startled by the sudden tension, began to fuss in its stroller. But its mother, instead of immediately soothing the child, was staring intently at her phone, reading something, her expression morphing into one of profound disgust. Then, from somewhere in the back of the now riveted crowd, a man muttered, loud enough for several to hear, "Holy cow, it's already trending. Let the colonel fly." Colonel Thorne did not move, did not betray any outward reaction. He didn't need to. The world, it seemed, was now watching. The tension in the terminal was a palpable entity, thick and suffocating. Supervisor Henderson was still missing in action. The remaining airline staff were frozen in an awkward, horrified silence. Phones were ubiquitous, recording, tweeting, streaming, sharing. And then, like a spark igniting dry tinder, the digital wildfire spread with astonishing speed. The young man in the hoodie, still glued to his phone, let out a low, incredulous whistle. "Damn! This is blowing up. It's everywhere now. Major news outlets are picking it up." Colonel Thorne maintained his stoic composure, knowing better than to celebrate a premature victory. But from the way Ms. Albright visibly stiffened, her face paling further, he could tell she knew it too. The woman in the denim jacket gasped, checking her own phone. "Oh my God, Frank," she whispered to her husband. "It's all over Facebook. There are thousands of comments." Sergeant Major Kowalski grunted, a sound of grim satisfaction, as he, too, pulled out his own surprisingly modern smartphone. "They have no earthly idea what kind of hornet's nest they just kicked," he rumbled, his thumb expertly navigating the screen. Then, as if on cue, the airport's loudspeaker system crackled to life. An anonymous, cheerful voice jarringly out of sync with the atmosphere. "Attention passengers. Due to unforeseen operational circumstances, Odyssey Airlines Flight 237 to Phoenix will be experiencing a delay. We apologize for any inconvenience this may cause and will provide an update shortly." A few groans of frustration rippled through the wider crowd in the terminal, but most of the people congregated around Gate B12 weren't even paying attention. Their focus was singular, riveted on the uniformed soldier being denied his flight while attempting to fulfill the most solemn of duties. A minute later, a young woman standing near the expansive terminal windows gasped audibly, He's on the national news ticker. Look." She turned her screen towards the crowd, and people craned their necks, leaning in to see. A news alert, stark and damning, scrolled across the bottom of a live broadcast. U.S. Army Colonel denied flight while escorting fallen soldiers' remains. Airline cites policy. Public outcry grows. Underneath it, the numbers were visibly climbing, shares, comments, angry emojis. It was a digital inferno. Then another tweet, this one from a prominent veteran advocacy group, popped up on multiple screens. We are aware of and disgusted by the disgraceful incident unfolding at Northgate International Airport involving Odyssey Airlines and a U.S. Army colonel. Our heroes, active and fallen, deserve far better than this. Expect swift and decisive action. Or honor the fallen. Let him fly. Odyssey Airlines. Shame, the crowd murmured, a collective sound of vindication and anger. The realization was sinking in. Odyssey Airlines had irrevocably lost control of the narrative. Ms. Albright, still frozen at her station, let out a shaky, almost inaudible breath. She turned abruptly and hurried towards the back office, disappearing behind a frosted glass door. She wasn't returning with an answer. She was undoubtedly seeking cover, or perhaps a public relations script. Colonel Thorne subtly adjusted the set of his service cap. He had been in high-pressure situations before, though admittedly never in an airport terminal, and never quite like this. He'd faced down hostile forces, negotiated with intransigent warlords, and navigated treacherous political landscapes where powerful individuals suddenly, and often too late, realized they had profoundly miscalculated and made the wrong enemy. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't gloating. Because at the end of the day, this spectacle wasn't about him or his pride. It was about Specialist Ethan Vance, the 19-year-old young man lying in honored repose on the tarmac, waiting to go home. And right now, that sacred mission was still incomplete, held hostage by incompetence or indifference. The crowd wasn't just watching anymore. They were participants, a chorus of dissent. The terminal felt different now, charged with an expectant, almost volatile energy. Then Supervisor Henderson finally reappeared. But he wasn't alone. Walking beside him, with a brisk, no-nonsense stride, was another man. This one was dressed in a sleek, impeccably tailored Navy suit, his Odyssey Airlines corporate ID clipped neatly to his breast pocket. His demeanor was one of controlled urgency, the air of a man accustomed to extinguishing corporate fires. He stopped just short of the counter, his sharp eyes rapidly scanning the scene. Colonel Thorne, Sergeant Major Kowalski, the phalanx of smartphones still recording, the grim-faced crowd. He cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the relative quiet. Colonel Thorne, the man in the suit began, his voice smooth, modulated, the epitome of corporate crisis management. He was Mr. Davies, a regional vice president, Thorne surmised. My sincerest apologies for this egregious miscommunication. There appears to have been a most regrettable error within our system. A glitch. We are, of course, working diligently to rectify it and get you on your flight to Phoenix as expeditiously as possible. Miscommunication. System error. Glitch. Colonel Thorne had been in the military long enough to recognize euphemistic damage control when he heard it. It meant, we've been caught with our trousers down. It meant fix this and fix it now, before it costs us millions, if not billions, in reputation and revenue. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he let the silence hang in the air, heavy and accusatory, watching Mr. Davies shift almost imperceptibly under the weight of it, the man's polished composure showing the faintest of cracks. I see, Colonel Thorne said finally, his voice measured, each word carefully chosen. An error, you say, Mr. Davies? Yes, Colonel. A deeply regrettable mistake, I assure you, Davies replied quickly, a practiced expression of concern etched on his face. It was most certainly not intentional, a confluence of unfortunate, unforeseen circumstances. A few disbelieving scoffs rippled through the crowd. Sergeant Major Kowalski merely shook his head slowly, a look of profound skepticism on his weathered face. Mr. Davies adjusted his silk tie, clearly uncomfortable under the unblinking scrutiny. We would like to personally escort you to the gate now, Colonel. First-class accommodations, of course, for your trouble. And for Specialist Vance, we will ensure the utmost dignity and respect for his final journey with us. First class. As if that was the crux of the issue. As if a wider seat and complimentary champagne could somehow atone for the insult, the obstruction, the profound disrespect shown not just to him, but to the memory of the young soldier he was escorting. Colonel Thorne's gaze shifted past the vice president towards the counter where Ms. Albright now stood, pale and shaken, her eyes darting anywhere but at him. The same agent who had offered that stiff, dismissive smile when she had first denied his flight. The same one who had cited non-existent policy without, it was now abundantly clear, bothering to verify anything. Colonel Thorne exhaled slowly, deliberately. "I appreciate the newfound urgency, Mr. Davies," he said, his voice retaining its unnerving calm. "But before we proceed, I need to clarify something of paramount importance." Davies nodded quickly, eager to appear accommodating. "Of course, Colonel. Anything." Colonel Thorne's voice remained even, yet it cut through the lingering hum of the terminal like a surgeon's scalpel. "If these good people," he gestured subtly with his chin towards the crowd, "had not recorded this incident, if Sergeant Major Kowalski here had not spoken up, if young Maya hadn't live-streamed this, if this hadn't exploded across social media and the news, would I still be standing here, Mr. Davies? Would Specialist Vance still be waiting on the tarmac?" A beat of profound, echoing silence. The only sound was the distant roar of a jet engine. Mr. Davies swallowed, a visible bob of his Adam's apple. "Sir, Colonel, we—" "You don't need to answer, Mr. Davies," Colonel Thorne interrupted, his voice gentle yet firm. He already knew the answer. Everyone in that terminal, everyone watching online, knew the answer. Another moment of taut silence. Then a woman in the crowd murmured, loud enough for all to hear, "He's absolutely right. Shame on you, Odyssey Airlines." Mr. Davies, visibly flustered, attempted to regain control, to smooth over the rapidly deteriorating situation. "Sir, again, we sincerely, profoundly apologize for this entire unfortunate episode. We will be conducting a full internal review." "We both know, Mr. Davies," Colonel Thorne stated, his gaze unwavering, "that this isn't merely about an apology. It's about accountability. It's about respect. It's about ensuring that no other service member, no other grieving family, ever has to endure such an ordeal." The crowd murmured its assent, a low rumble of agreement. The anger that had been simmering was now alloyed with a deep sense of disappointment, a feeling that a trust had been violated. Mr. Davies knew he was losing badly. He straightened his posture, attempting to adopt a more authoritative, decisive stance. "Colonel, please, let us get you on your flight now. We can discuss further redress once you're comfortably settled." But before Colonel Thorne could respond, a new voice, crisp and official, cut in. "Sir, Mr. Davies?" A young man in an airport security uniform, looking flustered, had materialized at the side of the counter. He held out a smartphone towards the Odyssey Airlines vice president, his expression tight with urgency. "Sir, I think you need to see this. It's from corporate headquarters." Mr. Davies frowned, a flicker of apprehension in his eyes as he took the phone. He scrolled, his face already pale, draining of its remaining color. He looked as though he'd been poleaxed. Sergeant Major Kowalski, ever observant, crossed his arms. "Something wrong, Mr. Davies? More system errors?" The vice president didn't answer, but Colonel Thorne already knew. The backlash had officially reached critical mass, exploding far beyond the confines of Northgate International Airport and the ephemeral realm of social media. A major, highly respected national news outlet had picked up the story, not just as a ticker, but as a lead item. The headline, stark and damning, was being broadcast across the nation. U.S. Army Colonel denied flight while escorting fallen soldier. Odyssey Airline scrambles. As video goes viral, igniting national outrage. Below it, a looped video clip played. Clear footage from Maya's live stream. From other passengers' phones, capturing the entire shameful exchange. Mr. Davies handed the phone back to the security officer, his hand trembling slightly. He inhaled sharply, a ragged, unsteady breath, and turned back to Colonel Thorne, his carefully constructed corporate mask now shattered. "Colonel, we deeply, profoundly regret this situation," he stammered, his voice thinner now, strained. "Odyssey Airlines would like to issue an immediate public statement, clarifying the circumstances and offering our unreserved apologies to you, to Specialist Vance's family, and to the United States Armed Forces." Colonel Thorne cut him off, his voice still quiet, but imbued with an undeniable moral authority. "Mr. Davies, the public, I believe, already knows the truth." Silence descended again, thick and heavy. Mr. Davies pressed his lips together into a thin, grim line. Colonel Thorne looked at the assembled crowd, at the sea of faces, many now etched with a mixture of sorrow and solidarity. He looked at the smartphones, still recording, not as instruments of intrusion, but as beacons of witness. He turned back to the chastened vice president. "I don't require first-class accommodations, Mr. Davies. I don't require special treatment. I require, and Specialist Ethan Vance deserves, the basic human dignity and respect that should be afforded to every citizen, especially one who has made the ultimate sacrifice for his country." Another murmur, this one softer, more reverent, ran through the crowd. Mr. Davies gave a stiff, jerky nod, as if that was the only response he could muster. "Understood, Colonel. Completely understood." Sergeant Major Kowalski let out a small, almost imperceptible grunt of approval. Colonel Thorne adjusted the brim of his hat once more. "Now," he said, his voice resonating with quiet command, "let us complete this mission." But the consequences for Odyssey Airlines were only just beginning to unfold. They had lost control of the situation irrevocably. The story was out, a raging inferno of public opinion, spreading faster than their public relations department could ever hope to contain. The terminal felt less like an airport gate and more like the scene of a corporate immolation, with phones still recording, passengers still watching, their faces a mixture of condemnation and sympathy. Then, something entirely unexpected occurred. A man, exuding an unmistakable aura of quiet, no-nonsense authority, walked into the already charged scene. He was dressed in a civilian suit, dark and conservative, but his posture, his direct gaze, the very way he moved, bespoke a military background. He wasn't airline personnel. He wasn't airport security. He was something else entirely. The crowd seemed to sense it too, an instinctive parting of the ways as he made his approach. His ID badge, clipped to his jacket, flashed briefly as he stepped up to Colonel Thorne and extended his hand. "Colonel Thorne," he said, his voice firm, respectful, but with an undercurrent of steel. "I'm Major General Armstrong, Department of the Army. We've been comprehensively informed of the situation." Colonel Thorne shook the offered hand, his grip strong and steady. He didn't need to ask how the Major General had arrived so quickly, or how the Army had become aware. The military, when it came to one of its own, especially under such egregious circumstances, did not equivocate. Major General Armstrong then turned his attention to the pale and visibly shaken Mr. Davies from Odyssey Airlines. His voice, though polite, was now laced with an icy disapproval that was far more intimidating than any overt anger. "Mr. Davies, the United States Army will be handling this matter from this point forward. Colonel Thorne and the remains of Specialist Ethan Vance will not be flying commercial." Mr. Davies blinked, his mouth opening and closing silently for a moment. Sir, we were just about to—" "You were just about to attempt to mitigate a public relations disaster of your own making," Major General Armstrong interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. He glanced at Colonel Thorne. "Sir, the Pentagon has arranged for a dedicated military transport. Your aircraft is fueled and waiting on the military side of the airfield. We will ensure Specialist Vance is accorded the full honors he is due, without further impediment or indignity." A collective gasp, followed by a ripple of murmurs, went through the crowd. People exchanged glances, a sense of awe mixing with their earlier indignation. The U.S. military had stepped in, decisively and powerfully. Colonel Thorne exhaled, a slow, deep breath. It wasn't relief he felt. He hadn't doubted his ability to see his mission through one way or another. It was a profound sense of affirmation that the system, however flawed, could and would correct itself when its core values were threatened. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Understood, General. Thank you." Major General Armstrong's gaze flicked back towards the Odyssey Airlines vice president one last time, his eyes like chips of Arctic ice. "Mr. Davies, this incident will be addressed, formally and at the highest levels." It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of immutable fact. Colonel Thorne turned to Sergeant Major Kowalski, who had been observing the entire exchange with a look of grim, profound satisfaction. "Appreciate your steadfastness, Sergeant Major," Thorne said, a rare warmth in his voice. The old Marine tipped his head, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "We look out for our own, Colonel. Always have, always will." Colonel Thorne gave the room, the sea of faces, one last, sweeping glance. The ordinary people who had refused to be bystanders, who had spoken up, who had leveraged the power of their voices and their devices to ensure this injustice was not ignored, that this story was heard. He adjusted his uniform, squared his shoulders, a silent acknowledgment of their collective courage. And then, with Major General Armstrong at his side, he walked away, not towards the commercial airline gate, but towards something far more fitting, something imbued with the solemn dignity his mission, and Specialist Vance, deserved. For Odyssey Airlines, however, the fallout was just beginning. They had hoped, perhaps naively, that the situation would fade with a few carefully worded apologies, a corporate press release, maybe a token gesture of goodwill. Damage Control 101. But the public, now galvanized, was not letting this go. News networks ran the story on a continuous loop. Veterans organizations, incensed, released scathing statements condemning Odyssey Airlines' callous disregard and incompetence. Politicians, sensing the shift in public sentiment, weighed in, demanding investigations, accountability, and stricter enforcement of protections for service members. Then came the financial repercussions. By the end of that tumultuous week, Odyssey Airlines stock had plummeted, shedding millions in market value. The hashtag #Boycott Odyssey Airlines gained terrifying traction, trending for days. Their social media channels were inundated with a deluge of angry comments, canceled bookings, and demands for transparent answers and systemic change. The final crushing blow came in the form of a class action lawsuit. A coalition of prominent military advocacy groups joined by Specialist Vance's grieving family filed a formal complaint against the airline, alleging discrimination, gross negligence, and a profound failure to uphold the spirit and letter of service member protection laws. Under immense, unrelenting pressure, the CEO of Odyssey Airlines finally made a strained, uncomfortable public appearance. He robotically read from a prepared statement, calling the incident a deeply regrettable misunderstanding and an isolated failure of our internal processes. He announced, with feigned solemnity, that the employees directly involved, including Ms. Albright and Supervisor Henderson, had been placed on indefinite administrative leave pending a thorough internal review. It was, by all accounts, too little, far too late. The damage was done. Meanwhile, Colonel Marcus Thorne continued his sacred mission. He escorted Specialist Ethan Vance home to a small town in rural Ohio where an entire community waited with tear-filled eyes and open arms. He stood, ramrod straight, a silent sentinel, as the young soldier's family received their son, their brother, their hero, for the last time. He didn't need the headlines. He didn't seek the fleeting glow of public attention. He had simply done his duty. What he and Specialist Vance had needed, and what had been so callously denied until the glare of public scrutiny forced the issue, was respect. Respect, Colonel Thorne knew, should never be conditional. It should never require a viral video, a trending hashtag, or an eruption of public outrage to be granted. It should be the bedrock, the unwavering standard, especially for those who wear the uniform and for those who make the ultimate sacrifice. The people at Northgate International Airport that day, Sergeant Major Kowalski, young Maya with her live stream, the scores of ordinary passengers who chose not to look away, who raised their voices and their phones, they had proven something vital. They had demonstrated that when individuals stand together, when they refuse to be complicit in silence, injustice, no matter how entrenched or bureaucratically veiled, has nowhere to hide. If you believe in accountability, if you believe in honoring those who serve and sacrifice, let your voice be heard, because silence in the face of injustice is a fertile ground for it to happen again. And next time, it might not go viral. Next time, the cameras might not be there. The promise of no one gets left behind is not just a military creed, it's a societal one, and it requires all of us to uphold it. Colonel Thorne's ordeal and the incredible stand taken by everyday people truly makes you reflect. What does genuine respect for those who serve and for the fallen truly demand from each of us beyond grand gestures? We'd be honored to hear your thoughts and reflections in the comments section below. If this story moved you and you believe in the power of sharing narratives that matter, please consider subscribing to our channel. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you won't miss our future stories of courage, conviction, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Thank you for watching.